Hey everyone, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're completely skipping the formalities and dropping you right onto the sweaty, vibrant dance floors of 1970s and 80s UK music history. We are talking about the origins of Britfunk music, a homegrown musical revolution that completely shifted the culture, yet somehow almost totally slipped under the radar of mainstream history. So let's dive right into this, because this quote right here is where our story kicks off for the modern era. Picture it, it's 2020, just before lockdown, and global superstar Tyler, the Creator, won an award at the Brit Awards. And instead of the usual, cookie-cutter thank yous, he dropped this quote right on primetime television. He gave a massive shout-out to a nearly forgotten 1980s UK genre. And let me tell you, that shout-out sent shockwaves through the music community. It had everyone scratching their heads asking, wait, what exactly is this British funk he's talking about? Well, to answer that, we kind of have to define our terms here. Britfunk has a really strong claim to being the UK's first, truly homegrown, multiracial musical genre, running neck and neck with lovers rock. It was this incredible, massive melting pot. It took the sophisticated, tight sounds of US jazz funk, injected it with the looser, reggae-tinged rhythms of the Caribbean diaspora, and then just smashed the whole thing together with the raw, do-it-yourself energy of the UK punk scene that was exploding at the exact same time. And there's a stark contrast here that's absolutely crucial. Try to hear this in your head, okay? American jazz funk from artists like Herbie Hancock or George Duke, it was polished, it was slick, it was the sound of highly trained studio musicians making smooth magic. Britfunk, on the other hand, it was rougher, it was faster, way more urgent, and driven by just pure, unadulterated enthusiasm. These British bands often didn't have the formal training of the American guys, but they totally made up for it with sheer energy and a uniquely British flavor. I mean, they even threw football-style chants into their songs. So chronologically, Britfunk sits in a very specific and highly crucial place in the timeline of UK dance music. See, for years, the narrative just jumped straight from the northern soul scene of the late 60s and 70s right over to the UK rave and acid house explosion of the late 80s. But look right there in the middle. From 1976 to 1982, Britfunk is literally the missing link. It was this exact era that created the blueprint for modern UK club culture. They pioneered the all-dares, the pirate radio integration, the whole white-label record culture that would eventually fuel the entire rave revolution. Let's actually put some names to this movement so you can see who we're talking about. Look at these pioneers. Bands like High Tension, Light of the World, Central Line, Freeez, and Beggar Co. These were the groups who just picked up guitars, drumsticks, brass instruments, and figured it out as they went along. No massive PR machines behind them, no corporate backing. They built their entire following from the underground up. Which brings us to part one, the cultural soil. To really understand this sound, we have to look at the environment it grew out of, the cultural soil of 1970s London. It was a time of intense political turbulence. The kids making this music, they were often the first-generation offspring of the Windrush generation, Caribbean immigrants invited to rebuild Britain after World War II. But instead of a warm welcome, these kids faced systemic racism, housing discrimination, just massive social barriers. So what did they do? They forged a brand new, uniquely Black British identity right on the dance floors. The clubs literally became their sanctuary. And man, those sanctuaries were legendary. We're talking about clubs like Crackers in Soho, the Gold Mine out in Canvey Island, Royalty in Southgate, and Rock City up in Nottingham. This was the soul all-dayer scene. DJs like Chris Hill, George Power, and Robbie Vincent became massive celebrities in their own right, spinning imported American soul to these incredibly vibrant, racially mixed crowds. It was this wild weekend circuit where inner-city kids and suburban kids all united over the groove. All right, moving to part two. Punk energy meets jazz funk. So the clubs are absolutely popping, the American imports are spinning, but the local kids decide they want to play it themselves. And this leads to a fascinating musical collision. Jean-Paul Bluey Monick, who played in Light of the World and later formed Incognito, captures it perfectly right here. He says, you're hearing punk, the energy of that. You're somewhere between that and a guy that's just thrashing a guitar. These musicians were hitting the exact same clubs as the punk rockers. They shared that exact same DIY attitude. You don't need to be a virtuoso to start a band, you just need passion. That is exactly what gave Britfunk its gritty edge. And historians have totally taken note of this too. Academic journals document how these live, guitar-based dance bands were creating complex, rhythmic fragments that sat right alongside the emergence of rap and new wave. It was just an incredibly innovative time for rhythmic music in England. Which leads into part three, fighting racism with funk. Because breaking new musical ground, that wasn't the only battle these artists were fighting. They were simultaneously pushing back against severe, systemic prejudice just to exist as musicians. The industry was heavily gatekept. Take the band High Tension. They literally broke into the top 20 charts with a massive hit. They get invited onto the legendary TV show Top of the Pops. And right after their performance, a floor manager pulls them into a dressing room and essentially tells them they've hit a racial quota, literally saying, "We're not letting any more of you on." Despite all their commercial success, the industry was actively trying to cap their visibility. And actually, the hostility extended way beyond television studios. It was literal street violence. When these multiracial bands went on tour, they were met with organized hate. At the Royalty Club, the far-right National Front turned up, and the police literally had to lock the diverse crowd inside just for their own safety. Up in the Lake District, locals tore the band's tour vehicles apart while they were inside a venue playing a gig. So the crucial takeaway here is that this music was hard-won. As Bluey Manon recalls, there were pitched battles, fistfights to protect what we had. We were proud of who we were. We weren't going to put up with it. Britfunk wasn't just some fun, upbeat sound. It was a movement of immense resilience. These artists fought physically for their right to play, to dance, and to just exist together in a highly fractured society. Finally, Part 4, the legacy of Britfunk. Because here's the thing, you absolutely cannot keep a groove that good down. The legacy of Britfunk is foundational to the music you listen to today. Just look at this progression. Step 1, the pioneers take the beatings, break the barriers, and get the sound onto the charts. Step 2, mainstream, predominantly white pop acts of the 1980s hear this incredible sound and adopt it for global superstardom. And Step 3, the kids who are dancing at those very Britfunk all-dayers grow up to become the underground DJs who invent UK house, techno, and acid jazz. If you want proof of that mainstream pop adoption, just look at Spandau Ballet. They were one of the biggest pop acts of the 80s, and they were massive Britfunk devotees. In their early days, they would literally sit in the corner of Light of the World's rehearsal rooms just to learn how to play bass and saxophone properly. When they recorded their massive hit Chant No. 1, they straight up hired the Britfunk band Beggar Co to play the brass section. That mainstream pop sound was directly lifted from these underground pioneers. And as for Step 3, Paul McLean of High Tension summed it up best. When he tours today and meets young electronic artists at festivals, he tells them straight up, without High Tension, Light of the World, Central Line, you guys wouldn't be here. The entire infrastructure of modern club culture, from the massive festivals to the superstar DJs, was forged in the fire of those early, gritty London soul clubs. Which brings us full circle to a modern renaissance today. Sparked in part by shoutouts like Tyler, the Creators, the genre is alive and well again. In 2020, legendary DJ Gilles Peterson teamed up with Britfunk pioneer Bluey to form a new project called STR Forta, and their goal? It's to intentionally capture that raw, unpolished, moment-to-moment magic of the original 1980s scene. They are actively making sure the sound doesn't get too polished, honoring that original DIY spirit. So we're going to leave you with this final thought. Britfunk built the bridge between northern soul and modern dance music. It fought literal street battles for the right to exist, and it influenced global pop superstars. Yet, it was nearly lost to history. If a movement this massive and this influential can be temporarily forgotten by the mainstream media, you really have to ask yourself, what other foundational roots of your favorite music are out there just waiting to be rediscovered? Keep digging, keep listening, and keep learning.